Good morning, everybody, for another episode of Morning Jim, and Happy New Year. As this year progresses, it could be the first full year for our YouTube program. And I want to thank all of you who are tuning in, and especially those of you who are sending me suggestions for things that maybe would be interesting to read. Suggestions for poets or specific poems you'd like to have me cover. I'll be trying to do as much of that as I can this year. And I hope you'll keep the suggestions coming in because that's part of what makes this interesting for me personally. This program was designed about a week ago, of course, and is going to include some poems that have been on my favorites list for a while and which I haven't read online before. You know from things I've said previously that Billy Collins is one of my favorite modern poets. He's only a few years younger than I am, so perhaps it seems like we have something in common. I don't know. I've never met the man. He likes hats, as I do, and you often see me wearing one in these readings, especially when it's a little cold in my room. But both Billy and I realize that the proper hats of yesterday are now goners. And that is a lead-in, of course, to a poem by Billy Collins called The Death of the Hat. Once every man wore a hat. In the ashen newsreels, the avenues of cities are broad rivers flowing with hats. The ballparks swelled with thousands of straw hats, brims and bands, rows of men smoking and cheering in shirt sleeves. Hats were the law. They went without saying. You noticed a man without a hat in a crowd. You bought them from Adams or Dobbs, who branded your initials in gold on the inside band. Trolleys crisscrossed the city. Steamships sailed in and out of the harbor. Men with hats gathered on the docks. There was a person to block your hat, and a hat-check girl to mind it when you had a drink or ate a steak with peas and a baked potato. And in your office stood a hat rack. The day war was declared, everyone in the street was wearing a hat, and they were wearing hats when a ship loaded with men sank in the icy sea. My father wore one to work every day and returned home carrying the evening paper, the winter chill radiating from his overcoat. But today we go bareheaded into the winter streets, stand hatless on frozen platforms. Today the mailboxes on the roadside and the spruce trees behind the house wear cold white hats of snow. Mice scurry from the stone walls at night in their thin fur hats to eat the birdseed that has spilled. And now my father, after a life of work, wears a hat of earth. And on top of that, a lighter one of cloud and sky. A hat of wind. Billy Collins could have been speaking for me. All of those images occurred in my life. In the newsreels, when my father went to work, when he came home from work, walking. And now he too wears a hat of earth. So I think Billy Collins can take ordinary subjects and observations from life and turn them into thoughtful bits of memory and piquant concepts that we like to focus on. Now, I'm going to turn next to a poem with a deeper message, perhaps, by John Crowe Ransom. I've read his stuff before, and as I've told you before, he's not a relative of mine, but I love his stuff. We read a much lighter poem of his in a previous program. Oh, that's been 2 or 3 weeks ago. But this poem turns on the tensions we feel when what we want to do conflicts with what we think we should do. It is called The Equilibrists. Not a word we hear much, but it references keeping one's equilibrium in, well, difficult circumstances. This is the book that I have that I bought many, many years ago for a very low price. In fact, it says on the cover that it cost 95 cents. And what's more, on the back of the book, which was what was described as a vintage book, the cover design is by Bradbury Thompson. Does that name sound familiar to Topekans? It should. We'll talk about it a little bit later after I read this poem. The Equilibrists. Full of her long white arms and milky skin, he had 1,000 times remembered sin. Alone in the press of people traveled he, minding her jacinth and myrrh and ivory. Mouth he remembered, the quaint orifice from which came heat that flamed upon the kiss, till cold words came down spiral from the head, grey doves from the officious tower ill sped. Body. It was a white field ready for love. On her body's field, with the gaunt tower above, the lilies grew, beseeching him to take, if he would pluck and wear them, bruise and break. Eyes talking, never mind the cruel words. Embrace my flowers, but not embrace the swords. But what they said, the doves came straightway flying and unsaid. Honor, honor, they came crying. Importunate, her doves, too pure, too wise, clambering on his shoulder, saying, Arise, leave me now, and never let us meet. Eternal distance now command thy feet. Predicament indeed, which thus discovers honor among thieves, honor between lovers. Oh, such a little word as honor, they feel. But the gray word is between them, cold as steel. At length, I saw these lovers fully were come into their torture of equilibrium. Dreadfully had forsworn each other, and yet they were bound each to each, and they did not forget. And rigid as two painful stars, and twirled about the clustered night, their prison world, they burned with fierce love always to come near, but honor beat them back and kept them clear. Ah, the strict lovers, they are ruined now. I cried in anger, but with puddled brow, devising for those gibbeted and brave, came I descanting. Man, what would you have? For spin your period out and draw your breath. A kinder seculum begins with death. Would you ascend to heaven and bodiless dwell, or take your bodies honorless to hell. In heaven you have heard no marriages, no white flesh tinder to your lecheries. Your male and female tissue, sweetly shaped, sublimed away, and furious blood escaped. Great lovers lie in hell, the stubborn ones, infatuate of the flesh upon the bones. Stuprate, they rend each other when they kiss. The pieces kiss again. No end to this. But still I watched them spinning, orbited nice. Their flames were not more radiant than their ice. I dug in the quiet earth and wrought the tomb and made these lines to memorize their doom. Epitaph. Equilibrists, lie here, stranger, tread light, close but untouching in each other's sight, molded the lips and ashy the tall skull. Let them lie perilous and beautiful. That is one of John Crowe Ransom's most beautiful and complex poems, I think. I showed you the cover, and I'll turn again to Bradbury Thompson. You may remember the famous book designer and graduate of Washburn University who designed the beautiful Washburn Bible, and there's a special room dedicated to him and it at the Alumni Center over at the university. Bradbury Thompson, many years ago, designed this book. Well, finally, I'm going to read the title poem from my own book, Immortal, Prairie. Maybe this will be too much Ransom for you in one day, but these Ransoms are not related to one another, but for some unknown reason, they both turned into poets. My father would have said, "Ah, it's a wise child that knows its own father." But I digress. This poem is called Immortal, Prairie, and it is the title poem for my book of poems, Immortal, Prairie. Here in each green, insistent season, a wind from the Midland of Texas swoops, for no discernible reason across Oklahoma and teasing Missouri gathers strength and purpose, slapping damp Kansas with rattling gusts, and clouds so stark sun splashes their tops when the earth is dark. The song of the meadowlark spills astray when the fitful prairie heaves and waves and the high hawk screeches whipped away. The few trees bend in the blow to take a set which lasts, turning away from the burden of wrenching air. Time here is intolerant of standing fast, of wooden buildings, and of plowing up. The only things that keep and dwell are the immortal, deep-seeking roots of grass, searching drinks in strata deep as a well. Railroads and wagon ruts will pass. The prairie wind remains and sighs late in the afternoon when the cool fire dies. Well, thank you, everybody. That's all for today. I hope there was something here that touched a chord in you, and I hope you'll join me next week for a completely different menu. Until then, goodbye and good luck.